My advice is just to make sure that you choose your market very carefully, pay very close attention to the regulations. There are a lot of markets out there where people will say, oh, I'm making this much money. And then, next week they're shut down because the city council doesn't like short-term rentals there. So you really want to make sure that you gauge the temperature for short-term rental favorability.
Welcome to the Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast, brought to you by the Rental Property Owner Association, providing benefits and services to real estate investors and rental property owners for over 48 years. With your host, Brian Hamrick from Hamrick Investment Group.
This episode is sponsored by Green Property Management, managing everything from single-family homes to apartment complexes in the West Michigan area. Find out more at greenpropertymgt.com. Hello and welcome to episode 255. My guest today played goalkeeper for a Big 12 championship winning women's soccer team. She spent years touring the world as the lead guitar player in a punk rock band, and she became a millionaire by the age of 31 by strategically investing in short-term and vacation rental properties. Avery Carl owns a portfolio of 30 properties and is the CEO and founder of the ShortTerm Shop, a real estate team that helps investors acquire short-term rental properties in the most recession-resistant markets. And she trains them on the methods that led her out of the corporate rat race and into financial freedom. Avery, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you so much for having me.
Your bio is very intriguing. Championship soccer player, played in a punk rock band. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? I'd love to know a little bit of detail on those two things as well.
Okay, sure. So I grew up in a really small town in Mississippi, and it was pretty apparent pretty early on that I was, pretty good at soccer. And so I always was into music and rock and roll music and punk rock and all that. And so to me, the soccer was a ticket out of the small town and getting myself to a school in a big city where I could play in bands and I could play music. So that's really it. I played at University of Texas, 2000 through 2009. And we won a Big 12 championship while I was there, and I got to play in lots of bands and do a lot of music, and it was a lot of fun.
So punk rock band, you toured the world. Who were you with?
Oh, it's nothing anybody's ever heard of. A bunch of little no-name bands, sleeping on the floor of vans and whatnot.
Compare that lifestyle to investing in real estate. What bridged that transition from sleeping on the floors, traveling in vans, to all of a sudden now you've become this real estate investor?
So there's kind of a lot in between there. So I stopped playing music professionally in 2013 and went and got my master's, switched over to the business side of music. So I was working in the music business as a marketing manager. And my husband and I moved from New York City to Nashville just in search of an easier living lifestyle than in New York. So when we moved to Nashville, I didn't have my real estate license at the time, and our agent at the time was really trying to steer us towards this very hip area of Nashville that was appreciating really quickly. And she was telling us how everybody was, cashing these $100,000 checks after 2 years of owning these houses, and we didn't buy one there because we were coming from Brooklyn and really, really tired of neighbors. So way out in the country, but we had enough for another property. We didn't even know real estate investing was a thing at the time. We didn't even know it was called real estate investing. We thought, we're going to go buy a rental property. And so we bought one just outside of that hip area in hopes that it would one day appreciate enough to pay for our future children's college, which is the wrong thing to base any investment on, appreciation, but that's what we did at the time. Luckily, it ended up being a really, really good investment. Cash flowed $1,000 on top of on top of the mortgage every month. Probably going to sell that one pretty soon and 1031 exchange it. But that's how we got started. And then once we got that first rent check, we thought, okay, this is something we want to keep doing. This is something we want to grow. And at that point, we started reading all the books and listening to the podcasts and educating ourselves, whereas most people do that before they drop, a $30,000 down payment, but that's not how we rolled at the time. And so we were thinking, okay, we have one down payment left of capital. How can we best utilize this to make as much money as possible, and so that we can scale the fastest? And so we landed on, let's do an Airbnb or a short-term rental. But we didn't want to do it in Nashville because the regulations are just very, very volatile there. They're constantly changing. It's a little scary, a little too scary to want to do it there. So we went a few hours east of Nashville to the Smoky Mountains, where that's what everybody does when they go there, is rent a cabin that somebody owns on an overnight basis. And again, had no education on it, didn't know anybody who was doing it. But, it did as much legwork as we could, as much analysis as we could without having a lot of resources, education-wise. And that one ended up being a grand slam also. And so we just kept that formula going and scaled that to 5 short-term rentals in the Smokies within about a year and a half. And then now our strategy is to use all of that heavy cash flow from the short-term rentals to turn around and go invest it in some more traditional long-term rentals. So we've got 30 units now total. 6 of them are short-term rentals. 5 of those short-term rentals are in the Smoky Mountains. 1 of them is a beach house in Destin, Florida, and the rest are like C-class single families and duplexes in Chattanooga.
So it's interesting that you knew nothing about owning and operating a short-term rental, but yet the first one that you bought ended up being a grand slam home run. Why is that? I mean, and you must have made some mistakes along the way. What were some of those mistakes you made? But ultimately, what was it that made you so successful?
The first short term was really just a lot of the existing short-term rental owners in that market are it's a very antiquitous market in terms of short-term rentals. And what I mean by that is most everybody there at the time that I started that owned places thought that you had to use one of the local property managers that charges 40%. You had to use one of these big cabin companies that's been around for 30 years. And we just kind of, for lack of a better word, just took the model and millennialized it, which, was happening in any of the major metro areas across the country of managing Airbnb properties from your phone. So we just kind of figured it out. We, figured, okay, well, we just, to get started, need a cleaner and then a maintenance person. And so we dug those up by calling other people who had their houses on Airbnb and VRBO and got a few numbers. And we got a lot of doors in the face, a lot of middle fingers saying, we're not going to give you our vendors. But, we scraped together the bare infrastructure of what we thought we needed to be able to manage it from far away. And it worked, it clicked. And I think the only thing I would do different now is to not get so caught up in the beginning about, taking every single booking and wanting it to be this special, wonderful experience for everyone, and just running it more like a business from the beginning and not like a vanity project.
What do you mean by running it like a vanity project? Were you putting too much money into it as an investment and not getting the return on that?
Yeah. So a lot of people, when they get into short-term rental investing, especially for their first one, they get really caught up in, I want this to be so special for everyone that visits, and I'm going to leave them a bottle of wine, and I'm going to do all this special stuff. And, my place is going to be so much better than the other thousands of places that they can rent. And just over improving, basically, people over improve on flips all the time. And it's very, very easy to fall into the trap of spending a lot of money that doesn't necessarily give you any return on it.
So it sounds like you did not go down the traditional path where you pay someone 40% to manage it for you were you self-managing
Mm-hmm.
on your first?
We still do. Yeah. So all of our properties we self-manage, especially, the short terms, that's what we do. So that's the way to maximize your short-term rental investment is to not use a property manager, because property managers with short-term rentals, they charge anywhere between 20 and 40% as the standard. And, at the end of the day, if you've got a 4 or 5 bedroom property that's grossing $100,000, that's a lot of money you're leaving on the table. That's a down payment for your next property. So, the way that technology is in 2020, you can do everything from your iPhone with just a few apps and answering, a few questions a day, similar to answering a text message. With one property, it really only takes about 30 minutes a week to manage one from wherever you live. And that's that is how my company, the ShortTerm Shop, got started, because when we were buying, no agent could answer any of the questions we had about return on investment, about how to manage these things, about anything really. So I became that agent in the market. And that's what I do now is I help other investors identify the right properties. We teach them how to self-manage so they don't have to hire an expensive property manager. And so we've scaled into several markets now. So we started in the Smoky Mountains. We also have an office in the Panama City Beach and Destin area in Florida, and then also in Gulf Shores, Alabama.
Yeah, I'd like to go over all those things you just mentioned. And why don't we start with just choosing the right market to invest in? You obviously have selected very carefully what markets you're in. What's your criteria and what should people be looking for?
Okay, so there's 3 types of markets that you can invest in as a short-term rental investor. There's metro markets, so like your Nashville's, New York City, and then there are big fly-to vacation rental markets where people take big expensive vacations, so like Hawaii, Aspen, Orlando. And then the third type of market is the regional vacation rental market. These are markets that are tourist dependent and travel dependent, but places where most of the tourists that visit are driving in. That's the type of market that I stick to the most, that I've found is the most recession resistant and just generally stable, especially post-coronavirus. Coronavirus has actually kind of caused a boom in tourism in the drivable vacation rental markets, because nobody wants to get on a plane to go to one of the larger, more expensive vacation markets. And they also don't want to go to big metro areas and be around a lot of people. So most people are now, everyone's dying to get out of their houses. So they're taking these weekend drive trips or, week-long drive trips rather than flying to Mexico to go to the beach or flying to Aspen to go to the mountains. So regional drivable vacation rental markets is what I stick to personally.
When you work with clients or students, when they're trying to choose a market that's kind of outside of the area that you're investing in, what criteria do you help them look for? I understand the regional drivable locations, but I'm in Michigan. How would you define for me what those are?
Well, what I tell most people is just think of any place that you maybe went with your parents growing up on a vacation where you didn't stay in a hotel, where you rented a house. That's a really good place to start. Google's also another really good place to start because there's tons of data on the best places to invest now. So if you want to cheat, Google, there's all kinds of lists. Rented.com's list of best places to invest in short-term rentals comes out every year. Smoky Mountains is always on it. The Florida Panhandle got #1 this year. Places like the Poconos, Big Bear in California, just really anywhere that you either growing up or, as you've been an adult, have friends that take weekend drive trips to, that's where you start. And then you check on the tourism data. So there's a few ways to do that. AirDNA is a really good resource for short-term rental specific data on looking at occupancy rates and price per night and average daily rate and things like that, or price per night and average daily rate are the same thing. But that's a really good place to start because you can buy the data on different markets. The data is not perfect, but it does give you a really good picture of what the overall trend in the market looks like. Other places that you can get tourism data, a lot of cities have a department of tourism that you can call and check. If there's any of the big local attractions in a city, like theme parks or national parks, conference centers, universities, major league teams, they're all going to have tourism data and visitation data on how many people attend their big events. So if you want to drill down that far, you can. But I mean, there's just a lot of actual data short-term rentals right now that you can just go out and buy and not have to do all that legwork.
And one of the distinctions you make is between buying an Airbnb and a vacation rental type property. What is the difference?
Sure. So a lot of people, they'll just say, oh, I'm going to buy this house down the street from my house in Kansas City, and I'm going to rent it short term because I can make more money than I can rent it long term. And that's kind of a reckless way to do it, a little bit irresponsible, because while you probably can make more money renting it short term than long term, there's a lot more analysis that needs to go into buying a property to be a short term rental. So buying a vacation rental is buying in an area where you've what the regulations are. You know the regulations are friendly. It's a mature vacation rental market. And what I mean by that is, like I said, people have been staying. It's been the normal thing for them to do to rent a privately owned property on an overnight basis rather than stay in a hotel. So, lots of beach markets, lots of mountain markets are like that. So you want favorable regulations. You want a lot of tourism, and you want to be able to see that these things stay rented. And if you're just buying something down the street from you because you thought it was a cute idea, that's probably not a good investment. So that's what I call just, quote, buying an Airbnb.
I'd like to take a moment to tell you about Green Property Management. Not only do they manage everything from single-family homes to apartment complexes in the West Michigan area, they also manage my entire portfolio. So I can tell you from personal experience that their unique flat fee management style is worth a closer look. If you feel that your property isn't operating to its fullest potential, then Green Property Management can help you take a holistic approach that will save you money, eliminate your headaches, and increase your net income. And if you're a property manager interested in applying Green Property Management's model, give them a call at 1-866-95-GREEN or visit them on the web at greenpropertymgt.com. I want to follow up on the idea of self-managing, because there's a lot of objections that come up when people invest in real estate, and I think a lot of it applies to Airbnb. They don't want to deal with phone calls in the middle of the night. If the toilet's not working, they don't want to be the one to have to handle it. And then also there's, with Airbnb, there's the scheduling. You have multiple people coming in and out, as well as the cleaning after those people leave. So on your first investment in short-term rentals, you took on all those responsibilities, and I imagine you were working somewhat remotely. So can you address those and how you were able to overcome each of those objections?
Yeah. So it's a pretty big limiting belief when investing in short terms that, people are going to call you in the middle of the night all the time. And it's happened to me probably 3 times ever in 5-6 years now across 6 properties. So, is somebody going to interrupt your dinner or inconvenience you with a question at some point? Yes. But is the amount of income for the amount of actual work you're doing on this worth it? 100%. So if a toilet breaks in my place 300 miles away, I'm going to do the exact same thing as if a toilet breaks in my house 20 feet away from me, and that's call a guy to come fix it. I don't know how to fix a toilet. So it's a phone call, whether it's in my house with me or if it's 300 miles away. As far as the scheduling, since I and all of like the scheduling and the answering of questions and the people coming in and out and everything that you just asked, since I started, there have been a lot of new tools come out to automate all of that. A channel manager is a platform that is probably the most important automation tool for managing remotely. It's a tool that'll, all the platforms that you have your property posted on, Airbnb, VRBO, TripAdvisor, all that, brings it all into one nice little dashboard for you to check out. Automates a lot of the repetitive emails that you have to send, it automatically will send their check-in instructions the day before check-in, automatically send them checkout instructions the day before checkout. We have ours send them a little note halfway through and say, hey, it's Luke and Avery. We hope you love our place. Let us know if you need anything. Here's our favorite hike. Try this. And there are also scheduling apps for cleaners that sync directly with your channel manager. So anytime a guest books on any of the platforms, it will automatically update your cleaner's calendar to let them know they need to clean, and then they have to acknowledge it. So then it sends back to you and says, hey, your cleaner knows they're supposed to come this day. So all that's automated. There's lots of automated pricing tools now as well. There's a lot of really technical algorithms of how it prices things. So pretty much everything is automated. You still do have to answer questions here and there if somebody calls and says, hey, where's your crock pot? Or not call, but they'll message you on the app and you just tell them where it is. So there's been a lot of things come out in the past probably 5 years to really make it easy to self-manage.
Well, what about just the cleaning after the person has left? Making sure the cleaning is done properly and just the overall quality control to make sure, okay, there's enough, coffee left for the next person or toilet paper. How do you make sure of those things?
Your cleaner makes sure. And this is also not a venture that you're going to be successful with if you're a micromanager. So, if you are somebody that is never going to trust your cleaner to have done their job that they need to do, and you're constantly going to be worried about that, then this might not be the investment decision for you. But the cleaners, if you're getting bad reviews and your property isn't being rented, your cleaner isn't cleaning your cleaner isn't working because they charge on a per clean basis. And if you're not getting booked, they're not making money either. So they're kind of like your mini property manager in a way. They're in there. They're going to tell you if anything's missing or out of place. It's their job to do the restocking of coffee and, changing out towels and toilet paper and everything like that. And they're going to tell you if it's time to replace something, like, hey, your towels are looking kind of ratty. Can you send me some more? And you just Amazon them to them. So it sounds kind of daunting, but you do have to trust your vendors to do the job that you've hired them to do.
Because you're in so many different locations and so far away, how do you find those trusted vendors?
It can be difficult to start out. And that's why I started the company that I have. So when I teach my clients how to manage these things, I get them in touch with all the vendors that they need to be able to manage remotely. So if they want to come buy a short-term rental in my markets, then we set them up for success by giving them all those people and teaching them how to find those people if for some reason ours aren't working for them. It can be difficult because a lot of these, cleaners, they're not making beautiful websites that you can find on Google and paying for SEO and things like that. So the way we did it when we first started and knew no one was we just got on Airbnb and VRBO other owners and tried to be as sweet as possible when asking if they might be willing to share their cleaner's information. Most people are going to say no because they don't want to give you make their cleaner too busy. But we got about 3 hits, 3 cleaner recommendations. So we had a few to choose from. I, after about 6 months, did end up firing that first cleaner. But at that point, we'd been running long enough that we had met enough vendors that I was able to find another one relatively quickly.
So at any point along the way, did you ever regret not having a property manager to take care of things for you?
Never.
Best decision you made right from the start, huh?
Yeah. In my opinion, at least in the markets that I'm in, it's so easy to do. And I'm not saying that it's not work, because it is work, but it's easy work compared to sitting in an office all day and with a boss that you hate. The only thing that property managers can do for you that you can't do from your phone is suck all the cash flow out of the deal.
I'd like to talk about cash flow and how you analyze a potential short-term rental investment as to whether it's actually going to make you money and be worth that investment and your time as well.
With short-term rentals, there are a lot of variables. So you want to make sure that you just get as many data points as possible. Whereas, when you're buying an apartment building, this is what the rent is, this is what the rent could be, and this is how much work you have to do to get the rent from here to there. It's really black and white. It's really spreadsheet friendly. But with short terms, it's very much dependent on how it's managed and who is managing it. And what I mean by that is, so 2 property managers could have the exact same property on their programs and do wildly different gross numbers, just depending on how it's marketed and how they're managing it. And so what I suggest doing to my clients is, and I help them analyze a lot as well, is buying the AirDNA data on a market. And then there's a few other data tools like Mashvisor. There's another one called Key Data that's pretty new. They're all short-term rental analysis specific. I recommend, digging into as many of those as you can and not using the little property specific analyzers that are really neat and cool looking on there, but really just looking at the market wide trends for the number of bedroom property that you're planning to buy. Also, there are 3 or 4 national property management companies that do properly utilize technology, where you can call them and get projections on properties, and also market-wide data. Vacasa is one, Turnkey is another, and Evolve is the other one that I recommend. So a combination of using the market trends that you're able to buy online that are just pretty much data scrapes of all the properties that were on Airbnb and VRBO, or that are on Airbnb and VRBO, and getting those big national property manager projections, because those guys are going to have access to a lot of big data that we as just regular people don't have. And then also I recommend just going on the platforms and looking around the neighborhood that you're planning to buy in and seeing what the other people that are on there are getting price per night wise, what their occupancy rate. We can't see what their whole occupancy rate is, but you can see how booked they are relatively. And then, start analyzing their listings. Are their pictures good? Are there misspellings in their listing? How can you improve on this? Is the property that you're buying superior or inferior to their property? And you kind of have to do some triangulation with several data points to figure out what yours probably should do. But luckily we live in a time where there's several ways to get that information.
Can you go over the financials with us and tell us, what do you look for as far as return on investment? What do you coach your students to look for, depending on how much money they put into a property to acquire it, rehab it, get it short-term rental ready, the kind of income they should be getting per month, per year, and then the expense ratio? What are the expenses that are up against that?
There are a lot of metrics out there for long-term real estate investing, and there's not a ton of metrics out there for short-term. So this is kind of what I tell my folks. And I'm in markets where a lot of the properties that are being sold are previous vacation homes or short-term rentals. So a lot of them are coming with furniture and pretty turnkey and ready to go. So they're not going to involve a lot of rehab unless you just want to start that project. I don't recommend it for clients who are on their first one, just because it can be kind of overwhelming to get one rolling without it being a rehab, and then throwing in the whole rehab is too much for your first one. So what I tell people is that you should be able to net reasonably in the markets that I'm in. If you don't use a property manager, you should be able to net after your expenses and your mortgage about 40% of the gross income that the property produces. Another kind of metric that a lot of short-term rental investors use is the gross rent multiplier. So, what percentage of the purchase price are you making in gross annual income on the property? So 10% is considered like the benchmark. You don't want to go below that. 20% is considered really, really good. So if a property is grossing 20% of the purchase price, that's considered a great investment.
I'd love to hear both a worst case example and a best case example, either for that happened to you or any of your students.
I had a client 2 weeks ago. He closed on his property, his very first rental. His guests were drunk. They fell over the back deck on the second story, and it's on the side of a mountain, and they had to be extracted by a fire truck from the side of the hill.
I think that qualifies as a worst case. Were they okay?
Yeah. Yeah, they were fine. I'm sure they were embarrassed. But yeah, I think that's a pretty a warm welcome into the short-term rental investment world. It was his first investment too.
What's the best case scenario that you've seen?
Best case scenario, I always love when clients call me 3 or 4 months after they've closed, or a year after they've closed, and they're like, "Oh my God, my property's making so much more money than you ever even said it would." Those are my favorite calls, because obviously I want them to be successful, but when they've exceeded all expectations, when their investments exceeded all expectations, that's a really great phone call to get, because at the end of the day, especially depending on what size property you buy, it can be a game changer for a lot of families. If you're netting $45,000 a year on a property, it would need to be a bigger one, but that's a parent being able to stay home with the kids and not having to put them in daycare, or whatever people's goals are. That can really be a big life-changing event, is just even 1 to 2 short-term rentals and the income they can bring in.
Yeah. One of the things I want to ask you is just about financing. So if you are going to invest in a short-term rental, how do you get financing on it from a bank? Is it a special type of loan or what?
Most of the time, they're just conventionally financeable, 20% down. What most people do, and it's kind of a trick to short-term rental investing, and this is only available if you're going to self-manage, is what's called the 10% down vacation home loan, which is it's a conventional Fannie Freddie product. There's a few stipulations on it for you to be able to get one. The property has to be 65 miles away from your primary home. You have to be planning. You have to be planning to stay there a few times a year. They're not specific about how many days that is. And you just can't put any sort of a contract on it that takes the control away from you as the owner, like a lease or a property management contract. But what you are allowed to do with your vacation home is rent it out on Airbnb and VRBO when you're not there. So that's one that people utilize a lot, especially on their first one, because it's a great way to get in with low money down, or lower than was initially expected. So most people utilize that on their first, and you can actually do one per market. So you can do a vacation home in a beach market, a vacation home in a mountain market. As long as they are 65 miles apart from each other, you can do that.
Tell us again what that loan is called.
It's called a vacation home loan, or a second home loan, not a vacation rental loan. People ask me about that all the time, and I'm like, no, it has to be a vacation home. If you use the word rental, they're not going to give it to you.
So I'm curious, you were a champion soccer player. You then became a punk rock musician, sleeping on floors, driving around the country in a van. That person that you were then, how has that helped you become the person you are now, a successful entrepreneur, short-term rental investor?
Well, the college athletics, I mean, it's pretty typical, like, teaches you discipline and hard work and work ethic, basically. And then the punk rock thing is just being okay, being surrounded by chaos at all times. Being adaptability, we'll call it that.
So do you feel like the short-term rentals provides that sense of chaos, or have you gotten it to a point where you're able to control any of the chaos?
It's a controlled chaos, because you can never predict what personality type is checking into your property, and are they going to be cool and not ask a lot of questions, or are they going to be hideous and hate everything even though it's perfect? Are they going to move the refrigerator and complain that there's dust underneath it? So it's a controlled chaos. It definitely does fill that chaotic void a little bit, but it's not too bad.
And as we wrap it up, Avery, any thoughts for our listeners who want to get into short-term rental, like what you're talking about? Any other words of encouragement you'd want to share with them?
My advice is just to make sure that you choose your market very carefully. Pay very close attention to the regulations. There are a lot of markets out there where people will say, oh, I'm making this much money. And then, next week they're shut down because the city council doesn't like short-term rentals there. So you really want to make sure that you gauge the temperature for short-term rental favorability. And other than that, as long as that is what it needs to be, just pull the trigger and go.
And if someone wanted to get a hold of you or find out more about you, how would they do so?
On my website, theshorttermshop.com, there are a few textable phone numbers on there. They all go straight to my phone. And my email's on there as well, info@theshorttermshop.com.
Avery, it's been a lot of fun listening to you talk about investing in short-term rentals and being very specific about how you choose your market, the types of areas you invest in, the numbers and how you finance them, as well as just how to manage them on yourself, by yourself remotely, and put together a team that can help you do that. So thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
I want to thank everybody for listening to this episode. I'm your host, Brian Hamrick from Hamrick Investment Group, and you can find out more about me by going to higinvestor.com. That's higinvestor.com. And you can also ask questions and join us on Facebook by going to RPOA, Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast. This episode was sponsored by Green Property Management, managing everything from single-family homes to apartment complexes in the West Michigan area. Find out more at greenpropertymgt.com.
You've been listening to the Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast, brought to you by the Rental Property Owner Association. You can find out more at rpoaonline.org. If you enjoyed this podcast, please go to iTunes to subscribe, rate, and review.